All right. I am Chronic Mayhem, and today we are taking a look at the GameSir Tarantula Pro controller. Let's get into it. All right, so at the top, GameSir did send me this controller. No agreement was made about what I can and cannot say in reviewing this controller, and all of the thoughts in this review are my own. So this here, the Tarantula Pro, is my first controller from GameSir. I've never used a controller from them before, so I'm pretty interested to find all the ins and outs of this unit right here. Now, this unit is pretty interesting. It has 1,000 hertz polling. It uses TMR joysticks. It has a pretty neat party trick up its sleeve concerning these face buttons, and it has 2 lockable buttons on the back. And we will go over all of those features in this review. But before we get into all of that, let's check out what you get in the box. So when you buy this controller, it's going to come in a sleeve like this. You know, this is pretty typical of a lot of the controller companies like FlyDigi and whatever I just reviewed recently. The Razer controller both had sleeves like this, and then, you know, the main box inside. As you can see here, most of it is in Chinese, but there is some English translations, which is nice. This is the Pro variant, which does come with the charging dock, and we will look at the charging dock as well. This is the main box that's in the sleeve. It's just an all-white box. There's nothing interesting once you get past this point. You get the controller, of course. You get a sticker. You get a very long rubber cable here, which does have GameSir branding on the USB-C end. And you get the charger here. It's a clear, kind of just clear plastic charger, but it does work. It lights up to indicate the battery level of the controller, and we'll look at all that as well. And you also get your 2.4 gigahertz wireless receiver dongle. And not to mention this novel of an instruction manual, which covers 11 languages. Wouldn't you know? 11. But of course, we really only care about the English section. It's a large, map-like pamphlet. It folds out. And believe me, you're going to want to hang on to this because I had to reference this instruction manual quite a bit during this review. So, taking a general look at this controller, it resembles a PS4 controller pretty closely. In fact, if I took out a PS4 DualShock controller right here, right now, you can see that the differences are not that far apart. They're roughly, the same size. You have the uniform sticks, of course. But the size mostly is where they are the most closely related. They even feel pretty similar in the hand. I'd say this is almost like a weird PS4 and PS5 hybrid. It's definitely smaller than a PS5 controller. The build quality feels very solid. I'm perfectly happy with the build quality. It's got these nice back buttons in the back with locking. We will go over those again later in the review. And it's got like this kind of camo pattern on the faceplate here, which is pretty neat. And when you turn it on, the face buttons light up. And when we go over these, I'll show you the interesting party trick that these are capable of. But I wouldn't call this RGB because you can't change the light color here. It's in its Xbox mode right now, so that's why it has the yellow, red, green, and blue. And you have some RGB up here, which you can configure. You have 4 more programmable buttons here. And I discovered during this review, you have programmable buttons up here as well that are not mentioned anywhere in the manual, but you can configure them in the app. This controller being so closely related to a PS4 controller, I find it extremely comfortable to hold. To me, this is more comfortable than the Wolverine V3 Pro that I reviewed in my last video. I have a soft spot for controllers with symmetrical joysticks like PlayStation. I grew up on PlayStation. So good PlayStation style controller, usually always gets bonus points from me. So this is a very comfortable controller to hold. I have no complaints with the ergonomics of this controller. And the back buttons are in a great place as well. I do wish it had 4, and we'll cover that later. But the 2 it does have are in a great spot. I apologize for my camera doing this autofocus thing. It's very annoying. I'm aware of it. But the ergonomics and the comfort of this controller, 0 complaints. As mentioned, this being the Pro version of this controller, it does come with a charging stand. You have your pins down here, which will make contact with the contacts here on the bottom. And as you see, my controller is actually pretty low on battery at the moment. So once it's charging, it will be red, orange, yellow, and then eventually turn green, depending on what the battery level of the controller is. As you can see here, it's just this clear acrylic kind of plastic. It fits fine right in the dock. It's not, it's pretty sturdy. It's not going to fall out. I mean, it's not the most expensive dock in the world. It's pretty basic, but again, you really don't need anything that's super over the top. It's just a charging dock. One nice feature, though, is you do have a port on the back for the wireless receiver. So you can plug this with your USB-C cable into your computer and have the wireless receiver here as well. This is not the cable that came with it. The cable that comes with it is a rubber cable. This is just my generic braided cable I use for pretty much at my desk. All right, so next I think we should talk about the TMR sticks in this controller. Now, you can think of TMR as an upgrade to Hall Effect, even though Hall Effects just came out recently and they're not even accepted widespread yet. But now we have TMR, which stands for Tunnel Magnetoresistance. I hope I said that right. So you basically have 3 types of joysticks now. You have the traditional ones that they use a resistance to measure voltage and then relay those signals back to the device, but has contact points, and those can wear down, and then you get stick drift. And then you have Hall Effect that use magnets to precisely measure the difference in electrical voltages and use that information to relay back to the device, and there's no contact points, and theoretically you won't get stick drift. There's typically still a repositioning spring in there, and theoretically that could fail and that could lead to stick drift. Where TMR sticks are different is they use ferromagnetism and quantum tunneling to detect and relay signals to the connected device.
Yes, science!
But essentially, you can think of it as an upgraded Hall Effect stick. The pros is that they use much less power to operate than a Hall Effect stick. So theoretically, the battery in your controller should last much longer. One other advantage of TMR sticks versus Hall Effect is that theoretically, and this is based on the research I've done, is that TMR sticks have up to 10 times more resolution points than a Hall Effect stick. Now, theoretically, that means they could be up to 10 times more accurate. This controller has a 1000 hertz polling rate, which is already top of the industry. But down the line, theoretically, TMR sticks will be able to achieve polling rates much higher than that. Now, in real world, will that really matter? Not really. But it's nice to know that they'll have a higher headroom than the Hall Effect and the traditional joysticks that we are using in the widespread of controllers that are currently available. And as I mentioned, TMR sticks are also supposedly supposed to require much less power to operate. The average TMR stick, based on the research I've done, would use roughly about 100 microamps, while a Hall Effect stick would use roughly 4 milliamps. So in real world, that will translate to longer battery life. The one other real world effect, I guess, that I would like to mention is through testing the various Hall Effect controllers that I have now, whether it be the Vader 3 Pro or my custom controller from AIM or the Apex 4. Granted, the Apex 4 you can adjust the stick tension. Same story with the Vader 4 Pro, you can adjust the stick tension. But on controllers where you can't, that are just straight Hall Effect, The TMR sticks, at least on this one, feel much closer to a more traditional non-Hall effect stick than a Hall effect one does. The Hall effect sticks, especially on my aim controller here, feel much looser compared to here on the Tarantula Pro from GameSir. So I personally like the sticks to have a little more tension when there's sticks like that, like on the aim, that are much looser. I find those to be less accurate to me. So I like these sticks that are, a little closer to the tension values that I think we're all used to. And we will cover how these sticks perform in Gamepad Tester near the end of the review. Moving along, let's talk about the triggers on the back of this controller. So these are Hall effect triggers. You have the full pull, and you have a mouse-like click if you turn on the trigger stops. There is a very short pull. I will compare it to the Vader 4 Pro over here. I would say it's about, oops, let's turn that one on. It's very close. As you can see, I would say the Vader 4 Pro is maybe a little shorter, but it's definitely not anything that it's not like ridiculously long like on the Elite Series 2, for example. It's much, much shorter than that. Actually, I would say they're pretty close to the same. So I don't know the exact measurement on the Tarantula 4. I know the Vader 4 Pro is about 1 to 2 millimeters, and the Tarantula seems to be very close to that. They feel great. They're very tactile, very clicky. I have zero complaints about the triggers on this controller. The switch feels nice and sturdy. And like I said, you have Hall effect when you switch it back to the full pull. So you know that you're getting the full accuracy of that. Great triggers on these. No complaints. This controller has 2 back buttons on the back here. I do wish it had 4. I feel like that for PlayStation kind of style Pro controllers, we pretty much have, the Envision Pro, which doesn't have Hall effect and has its own issues of software, etc. There's really not that many other options besides that. But it has 2 back buttons here. They're in a perfect location, I think. If you really only want 2 back buttons, then I think this is a good option. Another option on here that I also like is that you have the option to, okay, I say option a lot apparently, you can lock them in place, which is really cool. If you're playing a game where you don't want to accidentally hit these back buttons, you can just flip these switches and then you don't need to worry about it. I like this option much more than on the Scuff Envision, for example. You can remove 2 of the buttons. I like this system much better. So you just flip the switch as so, and they no longer click in. You flip it back, and now they work perfectly. These are not mouse click switches like the triggers. They still feel nice and tactile. They're pretty quiet. For only having 2 back buttons, I think these are fine. I do wish there was 4 though. Whether they put, maybe if they put 2 more where these switches are and they move the switches up here or something. I do wish it had 4. If maybe they have a Tarantula Ultra Pro or whatever, make it with 4 back buttons, please. The D-pad. So let's talk about the D-pad now. It is a traditional 4-way, but on the software you can turn off the directional patterns if you want. You can lock it to just up, down, left, right, like if you're playing a fighting game or something where you don't need to use diagonals. It's very clicky. I couldn't find on their website if these are mechanical switches or not, but they for sure feel like mechanical switches, especially when you compare them to the triggers when they are engaged and the face buttons over here, which are membrane. There's a clear difference between the D-pad and the membrane buttons over here, and it feels much closer to the clicky switch on the back of the triggers. So this is a pretty good D-pad. It actually doesn't move around much at all. If you really try to slide it around a little bit, you can maybe get some side to side, but it's barely anything at all. So really no complaints on this D-pad as well. The bumpers on this controller, or R1 and L1, whatever you would like to call them, these are membrane, but they're acceptable membrane. They do have a tactile bump in there. They feel fine. They do have some grip and texturing here on as well. It's the same texturing that you have on the trigger. I forgot to mention this earlier. Speaking about texture on this controller, this is not a rubber back. This is a hard plastic, but grip I don't think is going to be a problem. You do have this pattern on the back here as well. But yes, you have some textures here. Your fingers will not slip off, but these are not mechanical. They are membrane. All right, last thing before we start to get into the software and the manual of this controller, where I definitely do have complaints. Let's talk about the feeling of these face buttons. These are rubber membrane, but they do feel more tactile than, let's say, like on a standard PS4 controller. All my other controllers I have currently right now have mechanical buttons here, so I don't have other membrane buttons to compare these to, but they definitely do feel more tactile than on the PS4 controller. They're quiet, they feel great. As I said earlier, you don't have 4 buttons on the back, so I would expect you to use these buttons a fair amount still, but I wouldn't worry about them. As far as rubber membrane buttons go, they're still pretty good. All right, now we're going to dive into the software of this controller, and there are complaints, so get ready. First, let's take out this roadmap manual here. That is a lovely in 11 different languages, like I mentioned before. And we can see here that it specifically says at the bottom to download the GameSir Connect app from your Windows App Store. So I did that, but unfortunately, when you download that program, it's entirely in Chinese and it doesn't register the controller at all when you hook it to your computer. And I will now show you that. So this is the app that the instruction manual wants you to download, the GameSir Connect app. I am on the American Microsoft App Store right now, and I have downloaded this app as they instruct. As you can see here on the pictures, it looks great. It appears to be in English, no problem whatsoever. However, once you have it downloaded here and you start it up on your system, the app is entirely in Chinese and lists the T3 Pro, which I don't know if that's what this controller is called in China. I'm not sure. But whether I've tried having my controller hooked up wired, Bluetooth through the wireless dongle, it does not detect this controller at all. And it's very frustrating because you have an instruction manual in the English section specifically telling you to download this app, and the app is not even in English, and it's not even recognizing the controller. So that was a huge L. Hey, real quick, everyone, this is Mayhem from the future. So I found the correct way to get the PC app for your computer. I was tipped off on Reddit by Valuable Shoe 6557. He found the correct link to where to get this software, and I will leave it in the description below. So essentially, do not go to the Microsoft Store page to get this software because you will download a completely Chinese version, like I mentioned earlier, and it will not detect your controller. This link here, where it also says Microsoft Store, which is not correct, you click this link and it will download the correct program directly to your PC. Also, to use the wireless dongle with this application, you have to update the firmware on the wireless dongle right here under where it says the Microsoft Store link to download the GameSir Connect. You also want to click right here, and it will take you to where to download the latest firmware for the wireless dongle. To update the wireless dongle, just follow the instructions here. Once you have it downloaded, double click it like it says here, then click update your firmware, and it should load right up. And then after that, it should be all set. All right, we finally have working software on the PC. So once you have updated the firmware on your wireless dongle, you should have no problem using the wireless dongle with this software. So to get started, hold down the GameSir button and the X for about 2 seconds. And then after you do that, it should automatically connect to the wireless dongle. And once it does, it will pop up right here. There we go. So now it's pretty basic software, but really, I like that. You really don't need anything overly complicated. And now that I have it, I like it. So you can control all of your lights here. So this controls the light bar, and then you can go over here to change the colors and on the buttons as well. And it looks like you can also do all of your mapping here, which is interesting because they have another tab right on that home page where you can also do all of your button mapping as well. So speaking of that, let's go back to that main page. Click the home button at the top. So you can adjust your stick dead zones here and anti-dead zones. This is what I was mentioning down here. You can do all your button assignments right there. If you want, you can adjust your trigger dead zones as well. And if you go to the tester up here, you can test all of the assignments that you've done. And on this page, it actually does list the T1, T2, and T3 buttons, unlike the phone app. So it's great that it has it here. It's nice and clear, and it's much more easier to understand than the phone app, especially the iPhone app. That is a mess. All right, so here is the iPhone I will be using to demonstrate the app. I would love to show it on my Android because it actually works better, but the Android is what I'm using to film this right now. So this is my work phone. Now in the manual, as you can see here, I'll show you. If you want to connect this to an iPhone, it tells you a specific button combination that you need to use. Unfortunately, when you use that button combination, it won't connect to your iPhone. So the only way I was able to get this to connect was to use the Android button configuration, and then it will connect to the iPhone. So for Android, it's the GameSir button and A. So you hold them for 2 seconds. They will start blinking, and then you can take your iPhone here, connected. Fantastic. Now, the cool party trick that I think is kind of neat about this controller is you can switch it between Xbox and Switch layout here in the app. So all you got to do is click here, and the gloss on the buttons makes this pretty difficult to pick up. But if I hold it like this, so it's an Xbox pattern now, I'll switch over, and you can see it manually switch over between Switch and Xbox. That's a pretty cool trick, I think. Now, will this little gear mechanism, how long will that last? Well, time will tell. I do like that they put a little window here so you can actually see the gear moving when it switches back and forth. That was actually a really nice touch. When there's actual moving parts and things, I like to be able to see what's happening in there. This is also the screen where you program all the buttons that you want. So right now I have my L4 and my R4, which are the back buttons on this controller, programmed to B and A. So you select, so like let's say I wanted to program C1, which is this button right up here. Let's say I wanted, you just click that, and then you have all these options that you want to assign it to. So I assign it to A, and boom, it's already on there. So it is very fast. I do like how fast this loads onto the controller. Now, this was the other interesting thing. On this screen, it lists T1, T2, and T3. But in the manual, it does not list those buttons at all. See, and I'll hold this up here so you can see. And I thought, where is T1 and T3 on here? The manual does not describe them at all. And then when I was looking over the controller, I noticed there's these lines right here. Now, these are not raised like the grips on the bumper or on the triggers. They're just glossy lines. But when I was activating it, they do have their own switches in there. So there's one here, and there's one there as well. And they sound completely different. Like these almost sound mechanical, and then this, it might be membrane or mechanical. It's hard to tell. But you actually have 3 more programmable buttons here in this GameSir logo up here as well. So that's pretty nice, except they're in locations that are almost completely unusable. So if you wanted to use this button here and you have your fingers resting on the bumper, you gotta kind of reach your hand over completely and get it that way, which is pretty awkward. It's not like the extra bumpers that were on the Wolverine V3 Pro from Razer. Those were more like located like in this area. So you could easily get those. This one, you have to reach way over there to get them. And then you have this one right here, which I don't know when you would ever click that, because by default, it's pretty much the same function as the GameSir button, which is like the Xbox button or the PlayStation button by default. And so I don't know a practical reason for that to assign to anything else on here. And you cannot assign it to any keyboard functions as well. So it's a nice that it's there, but it's honestly not that practical. And the other confusing thing, when you go to the controller testing option here, they're not listed there as well. And the controller in this picture is also Xbox format, which is also pretty puzzling. And this is my other frustration with the iPhone app, at least. This does not happen on the Android one. So because I had to put this in Android mode in order to get it to connect to the phone, I can't use the tester because it's in the wrong mode. But then if I put it in its iPhone mode, like this, it completely disconnects and then it still doesn't work. And now the controller is not connected to the phone at all. So that's very frustrating. So let me put it back in its Android mode here, and then I'll hit connect. See, and now I am connected again. And here are the lighting settings. You can do the RGB here as well. So by default, it's at 50% brightness, but you can crank it right up if you want. You can have rainbow, you can have static. And as you see, the changes are instantaneous. I do like the, hold on, let me hold this in a way so you can actually see what's going on. So rainbow, and then static, which is the static blue, which is what I like. Colorful, which is a little bit different than rainbow. And then just static. I like to just keep it on static blue and put it at about 50%. And you can also set the brightness for these buttons as well. So you can assign all the RGB buttons as well for these. As you see, now they're all yellow, which is gross. And you can put them back to the default Xbox colors as well. I'm probably just going to make them all blue to match the blue bar and then call it a day there. So I have changed the dead zones by default are on 5. And when you have that, you clearly have 0, 0 for your dead zones. So I am moving the dead zones to 0. You can see that there's some slight difference now, but the sticks for the most part do return to a value that is pretty much the same. So for axis 1 and 2, or 0 and 1 for the left stick, it's 0.0098 typically, sometimes 49, but that's not a big enough difference to really mean anything. Axis 1 as well, it seems to have the slightest bit of jitter. Same a little bit on axis 2. So let's put it down to 1. Try that again. Nope, let's try to put it on 3. I bet that will fix it. There. So we know 3 will fix it. Let me just try 2. Let's really push it. 2. 2, you're good. Let's try 1 again. So 1 seems to be there's still a little bit jumping, but again, this is being extremely anal. You're not going to experience this in-game. So you shouldn't have a problem, putting your dead zones to 0 and putting all your dead zones in the 0 in the game as well. So let's do the circularity test. We'll switch over here. So the left stick is in the circle pattern right now, and so is the right stick. So we will test those. It should be 0, 0 for both since they're pre-programmed right now to be a perfect circle. So let's try that. 0.3. Again, this is with dead zones on 0. And we got 0.2. So roughly perfect. If we put those dead zones, to 3, it would be, or even 2 probably, it would be 0.0. So now let's test that with the raw. So we're going to do this, unclick that, do that, and now it should be a little bit more like a square. And that is a damn good value right there. I really like these sticks. I like that they feel more like traditional analog sticks. You know how Hall effect sticks can feel a little bit loose. I really like these. They have slightly more tension, but they don't have as much tension as like the Razer Wolverine V3 Pro, for example. So great sticks. And now that I actually have the correct software, which I, again, will leave a link for in the description below, everything seems to work great. We're now looking at the Amazon page for this product. So this is the Pro version, as I mentioned before, meaning it comes with the charging base, and it is $79.99. This just released recently this week. The week of October 15th is when I am filming this, and I believe October 13th was the official release date, but regardless, it was this week. You can see all the features there as well. And as I mentioned, this is the Pro version with the base. If you want the non-Pro version, so no charging base, you will save $10 and it will be $69.99. Personally, if I'm going to buy this controller, I would just pay the extra $10 and get the charging dock with it. I think it's kind of a nice to have item. So, what are my final thoughts of this controller? After getting the correct software, I thought it was only fair to refilm this part of the review. So now that I have the proper PC software, a lot of my frustrations with this controller did go away. And I apologize for the autofocus popping. I was trying a new setup for this review, and I'll obviously need to tweak it a little. But now that I have the correct software for this is a really good controller. A lot of my frustrations with it were software based, either trying to figure out that all in Chinese software that the manual does tell you to download. So that is one frustration point I still have. The manual tells you specifically to download the app at the Microsoft Store right there. And if you actually do that, the version that is on the Microsoft Store, it's entirely in Chinese and will not recognize the controller. Granted, it does say go to the website as well, but as I showed you, even on the website, it says it's downloading it from the Windows Store, and it's really not because it's not the same version. But regardless, I will leave the link for the right place to get the correct software below. And the iPhone app for this controller just simply is not completely functional. It doesn't work. The Android one is much more functional, but regardless, I hate phone apps for controllers. Only use it if you absolutely need to, and if you're an iPhone user, well, you're kind of shit out of luck. But the overall thoughts is this is a good controller. Again, I apologize for that autofocus. This is a great controller, but when you're talking about value, this is the Pro version of this controller. It's a $79.99 controller. You can save yourself $10 by not getting the charging dock with it. But when you're in that price range, you have to mention the FlyDigi Vader 4 Pro, which is the same price. So the difference is here, you get the 4 back buttons with the Vader 4 Pro, you get the removable caps, and you can adjust the stick tension. You can't do any of that with the Tarantula. Granted, you have the cool, hat trick of the buttons being able to change themselves or in the software, and you can watch the little gear here. Well, it does that. You have to ask yourself, does that outweigh all the other options that are on the Vader 4 Pro? Now, this is, of course, more of a PlayStation style versus more of an Xbox style, but both these controllers, I would say, are very comfortable to hold. This is kind of a strange hybrid between the PS5 and the PS4 controller. It's a little bit bigger than the PS4, but not as big as the PS5. It's very comfortable, buttons in the great spot, but you do only get 2 of them down here. The rest are up here in locations that I don't really think make the most sense. But so for $80, It's kind of a toss up. I mean, I think I like the Vader 4 Pro a little bit better. I will most likely be using this for more story, like relaxing games, and be using this for more of my super competitive first person shooter games. But both are great controllers. And I would like to thank GameSir again for sending this out to me. So that will be the review. I am Chronic Mayhem. If you liked this review, please hit like and subscribe and maybe check out some of my other videos as well. I also stream on Twitch. A link to that should be appearing right here. I usually stream every Tuesdays and Thursdays, typically at least once on the weekend, like a Friday or Saturday, around 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And all of my socials will be listed down there as well. I will have a Amazon affiliate link for this controller and some of the other controllers I've reviewed and mentioned in this video. I will list the pro and not pro version of this controller, even though the only difference is the charging dock. And to be clear, those are Amazon affiliate links. They just help me continue to buy products so I can review them in the future. So that is going to wrap up this video. Thank you guys all again for tuning in, and I will see you all next time. Peace.